What is one thing that you do that fundamentally is just difficult for you? Is it eating a vegetable? Is it adding fiber? Is it having protein? Is it being better about sleep? Is it being better about hydration? There are a lot of different, foundational habits, but don't try and do them all at once.
Adam Bornstein, welcome to the show. What's going on?
I am very, very happy to be here. Just flew in, we're here.
I love it.
Off a plane, fresh, ready to go.
Amazing. Well, I skimmed your book and I love it. It's very thorough.
Thank you.
For a topic seemingly as simple as fat loss today isn't really the most simple thing to achieve for most people. So I'm glad you've put together this tome on all things fat loss. You even have like how to take out from the top 50 restaurant chains in the US.
I think for a lot of people, even the idea that they can eat takeout is probably the most counterintuitive part of it. But that's, to help people figure out this messed up food environment. I think a big part of the book is learning that we can't fight it. We got to learn how to coexist. And when we learn how to coexist, then we can learn how to have leverage and take advantage of it in a way that, you can eat without losing your mind.
Damn. Well, it's about time. I'm pumped. So I guess like high level, and then we'll take it wherever you want. But, social media can at times seem like a wasteland for credible, sound nutrition advice.
It's difficult. That is a dangerous place out there.
It is. So from your vantage point, what would you say are some of the top myths that are out there being perpetuated, whether it's like by influencers or even the media, that are holding people back and causing this fractured relationship with food, unintentional fat gain, et cetera, the top myths?
Yeah, I think the first one is this obsession with our metabolism. Right? Everyone's trying to sell you how to boost your metabolism, light up your metabolism. And what science shows is that our metabolism is pretty static for the majority of it, right? The majority of our metabolism is our basal metabolic rate, anywhere from 60 to 70% of your metabolism. And from the time we're 20 to the time we're about 60, it doesn't change, right? And there's a huge study that came out. And that doesn't mean that we can't influence things like exercise and diet, but that's actually the minority, right? So people are constantly trying to manipulate their metabolism. And in trying to manipulate their metabolism, they're more likely to break it and do damage by going to these extremes, right? The best example being this study on The Biggest Loser, right? The popular television show that was on for a while with the extreme weight loss. 1 year, they followed people during the season, before, during, after, and then 6 years after.
Wow.
And what they found is almost everyone lost weight, a lot of them. In that season, one person lost up to 200 pounds. But what they found was afterwards, 13 of the 14 people gained all the weight back.
They gained it all back.
They gained it all back and then some. But that wasn't the most interesting part. Our metabolism, right, is supposed to either upshift or downshift, right? It's called metabolic adaptation. So when we lose weight, the thing that a lot of people get wrong is our metabolism actually slows down, right? We think that the smaller we are, we're going to have this super fast metabolism. But we actually, the more we weigh, the more we burn. It's no different than a car, right? The more fuel, a bigger car, a truck needs more fuel. So what happens is when you lose weight, your metabolism should downshift. But if you gain the weight back, your metabolism should upshift. It's just not offsetting your body. And then these people who lost all of this weight so rapidly, they were burning 500 fewer calories than they should have at the weight when they regained it. So they were worse off than when they started. And then 6 years later, they did all this blood work. They look at the hormones that affect, hunger and satiety, leptin and ghrelin, and their leptin levels were 60% lower.
Wow.
Which means they were screwed, right? They were even hungrier than they should have been. So we spend all of this time trying to manipulate our metabolism. And what people are you're very unlikely to speed up your BMR, right? Your basal metabolic rate. But you are much more likely to break it by pushing to these extremes. So taking a different approach on focusing what you can eat and not obsessing about speeding up your metabolism is a huge, huge myth, as is this idea that there's a one-size-fits-all diet.
People, aside from like attempting to manipulate one's metabolism, I feel like a lot of people will blame their metabolism, right? They'll get into middle age and they'll develop that middle-aged pouch that so many of us seem to develop, and they'll say, my metabolism isn't what it used to be.
Every time, right? And that's what. Listen, I once thought that too, right? I'm like you. I'm on the other side of 40. And, you start to think that, I'm getting older. My body's going to start fighting against me. But that's why that huge study that came out, we got another 20 years before our metabolism actually starts decreasing. What happens is people start changing their behaviors, right? They don't exercise the same way they used to. They eat more, they stress more, they sleep worse. And all of these things add up to make a big difference. But it's not that your body is fighting against you. You oftentimes fight against yourself, or you put yourself in a position where you're constantly trying to overcompensate because you tried to be so perfect, right? The big fat loss myth is this one size fits all diet, right? And you see it all the time. You got to cut out all carbs. You got to cut all fat. You got to cut all meat. You got to cut all dairy. You got to cut out all gluten. There are so many different things. And what happens is people almost pigeonhole themselves. They put themselves in a corner where they remove everything. And at some point, fat loss stalls. But what do you do when you've already removed everything that's supposedly the villain? There's nothing. So you start cutting calories more, or you start cutting protein more, or you don't have the same type of energy to exercise. And one of two things happens. One, you continue to double down, right? You're on empty and you're just grinding those gears. Or you just say, fuck it. And you quit entirely. And that's how people yo-yo. But the yo-yo is a byproduct of what people are told that they need to buy into one extreme. You and I both know that you can eat a wide variety of foods, but you make people very fearful of so many foods. And when fear is what's leading your decision-making, fear is great at selling to people. The two primary drivers emotionally from a marketing standpoint are fear and greed. From a psychological standpoint, research shows if you have fear, if you have greed, you can sell people. But fear and greed are terrible at creating behavioral change. And in our game, and helping people be healthier and helping people eat better, you need to help them learn how to make better habits.
Yeah.
And you're not going to build a stable foundation on top of fear or greed.
Yeah. 100%. I mean, there's so many social media accounts now. I feel like it's always like somebody, like some shirtless guy at a supermarket screaming at food,
Right.
Or like, this is not like a personal judgment or anything like that, but it's just kind of the way that social media works these days, right? It's like the more extreme the viewpoint, the more the algorithm seems to favor that content.
Do you want to know what's messed up about that?
Yeah.
Our brains favor that too. I talk about it in the book. Why is it that we're constantly reacting or overreacting to certain diet plans, right? We should know better, right? How many times has a new fad diet come out and we want to resist the urge? But there are studies that look at our brain and look at the parts of our brain that light up. And when you get a novel stimulus, something new, something different, something shocking, something so hard to believe that you can't believe that it's true, the center of our brain actually lights up that releases dopamine. And dopamine is that pleasure that makes us want to buy in, and it makes us more likely to believe, invest, and try. Whereas the things that are boring or almost, it's too easy, it can't work, once we're familiar with something, we kind of lose interest in it.
We habituate.
Right. So what happens is the things that we know that work, right? Science is based on two principles, good science, right? And the thing about science that frustrates people, but it's the reality, is it's always changing, right? We've learned so much over the last 20 years that if we were to go in a time machine and tell people what we know now, they probably wouldn't believe it based on what they knew then. And that can frustrate people, but we should use that as a way to continue to grow and ask better questions. Science is built on just asking questions and getting better answers. But the things that we know with the most certainty, right, not rock solid, it's based on reliability and validity, right? Do we know what something says, and can we repeatedly test it and see a similar outcome? That's boring, though. It's boring to tell someone to eat fiber or eat protein. It's nowhere as sexy as some of the claims, but that can be leveraged against you. It oftentimes is helpful to look less at what diets disagree upon and more on what they agree upon. And if you found that middle circle of the things that they agree upon, those are probably the habits that you're most likely to get the most benefits out of.
Yeah, 100%. I want to go back. Oh man, where to take this? Because I do want to talk about like what salient aspects of each of the different diets that you've studied do have in common.
Right.
But I do want to jump back to the Biggest Loser phenomena.
Yeah.
So what, like, because I didn't watch the show.
Right.
What is it that they were doing wrong that seemingly crashed their metabolisms?
Yeah. I mean, it was probably everything. You know, the golden rule of diets is, you know, if you can't do something sustainably, you probably shouldn't be doing it at all. Right. I can even throw it back to you. I saw it's just your birthday, right? You're 41, you're looking lean, you're looking good. And you're like, it wasn't that hard. Why wasn't it hard for you?
Oh, man. Yeah, well, I've gone down the rabbit hole, and I love this topic these days, talking about this, because, yeah, it was very, very easy for me. I mean, the first thing that I did was I just started eating home more frequently.
Right.
You know, that's literally all I did. I started eating home more frequently. I was eating out a lot. You know, when you go to a restaurant, it's like you want to get your money's worth. You want to eat everything that they serve to you on the plate. You have no control over portion sizes. You have no control over the mystery phantom fat calories that seemingly coats everything on the plate.
Right.
Right? Like, why do they need to? I was at a restaurant recently and I ordered steamed vegetables and they came coated in oil.
Right.
It was insane. And I'm not fat phobic by any means, but like fat calories add up real quick.
They do. And they make things hyper palatable too.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
So that was like step number one for me.
Right. And that's a great example of, you know, as I said, you probably though didn't say I'm never going to eat out.
Correct. No, I didn't
Right.
say, yeah.
You're just, I'm going to eat more meals at home. So
Yeah.
like one of the things here is that you want to create these sustainable habits. When we push to these extremes, black and white thinking, right? The people who lose the most weight and keep it off. There's this fascinating study, I believe it was in the journal Obesity, that looked at the people who have been able to keep off double-digit weight loss for 15 years or longer. And it was from a psychological perspective, right? And they avoided what's known as dichotomous thinking, which is just black and white thinking. So they didn't think that any individual food was terrible. They didn't think that they had to avoid something. They didn't think they could never do it, right? Because when we push to those extremes, usually the opposite of what we want to achieve occurs. There was another study in the journal Appetite where they told people for one day and one day only, do not eat these foods, right? And it was like the dessert, sugar, fat, salt-laden foods, the things that are hyper-palatable, the bliss point foods.
Yeah.
One day, don't eat any of it. What happened? They ate 133% more calories.
Damn.
And that's in one day. And it's like you had one job, right? It's like you can almost see the meme. And we put people on these diets and then tell them like, don't touch any of this stuff for 4 weeks, for 6 weeks. What's going to happen? Either during that, they're going to break, or when it's over, or they're just waiting for that moment, as opposed to taking a more balanced approach of, say, I'm going to go ahead and eat takeout once or twice a week. And it probably takeout as opposed to going to a restaurant for the exact points that you made, right? When you are going to a restaurant, you're probably much less likely to make a whole bunch of requests of the waiters, and then there are cues all around you, right? So there's the bread that's walking by, there's the smell from the food in the kitchen. And we are creatures that respond to these cues, right? There's even a book called The Hungry Brain that talks about how our brain responds to all of these different cues. When you order takeout, you remove yourself from those cues. So there's fewer things that are pushing you towards certain foods. And it's a lot easier on your favorite app to just tell people, and this is what I recommend, to do a quarter of the oil. Now, are they going to actually measure it? But this is in the book. If you order a dish with full oil or a quarter of an oil, and a quarter is very, very specific, and they're not going to do it, but it gives you an idea that I just want a small percentage. The dishes look different. And as you said, those fat calories add up. Oils aren't the problem. It's just that oils tend to be in all of these foods that make us overeat, get overloaded with calories, and then make us hyperpalatable to the point that we just want to keep on eating. It outsmarts our hunger signals, so that even though we just ate a lot of food and we should be full, we're not. So when you order takeout and you determine how many you're going to have, right? It's almost a bank account. I get it twice per week. If I don't have it, great. If I do have it, I'm in control, so that I know that they're likely to put a ton of sauce on it. They're likely to dress it in oil and make those recommendations. And the taste is not different. I would argue it's actually better.
Yeah.
It is way better. So you're going to enjoy the food more. You're going to save yourself hundreds of calories, and you're going to have the freedom, especially psychologically, to not feel like you're so restricted. So I think what you have found is that, you made small changes, but you didn't make it so black and white that, you didn't feel like you couldn't have it. You knew it was there, but you were just making a decision that puts you more in control. And I think when you look at The Biggest Loser, to get back to your initial question, right? They had to be working out around the clock. They had to restrict themselves completely. They had to be weighing themselves every single day where the competition was like, does the scale go down? Where you're just beating your body to a pulp, right? Healthy weight loss for most people who are overweight, and you can obviously achieve more, is 1 to 2 pounds per week. It's not something extreme. But when you like zoom out and you're like, wow, if I lost like a pound a week for a year on average, right? So some weeks might lose 1, sometimes 2. No one's going to be upset by losing 50 pounds in a year, now 100 pounds in a year. But we become obsessed with the speed. And the speed is a drug.
Yeah.
The speed is a drug that, I like to say the poison's in the pill. Sometimes, we look at these diets where it's like 4-week fat loss, 6-week fat loss. When I see those things, I ask myself, why are they putting a timeline on how long it works? Right? The right things are the ones that you want to keep on working, because like a book or a plan shouldn't stop being effective the moment you use it. Right? If we know anything, like you should actually get better with time. The more familiar I get with something, the more I feel like I have leverage. It becomes a competitive advantage. But if something becomes an anchor by the time you're done, if you want to ditch it, if you want to leave it, if you're fucking miserable, and a lot of diets, if they leave you worse off.
Right.
That's a problem, right? I'd say like so much of this book is saying that like a lot of nutrition science can dupe us by this idea of like showing us the new and novel. But try and take those situations and apply it to something else outside of nutrition to see like, is this just bat shit crazy? Right? The plans that ask you to cut out everything, one of the analogies I make is, if you're teaching someone to swim, you don't throw them in the deep end. No, you actually like start in the shallow end and like dip their toe in the water so they can become comfortable, right?
Yeah.
Because the idea here is to build habits. And you need to be able to press outside your comfort zone, but you don't want to leave it completely. And this is based on this Yerkes-Dodson model.
What's that?
So Yerkes-Dodson is an inverted U curve. All right. So you can just kind of picture this beautiful inverted U. And on the x-axis is going to be the amount of stress or anxiety you're experiencing. And on the y-axis is going to be your performance, right? Your personal zone of genius, when you're just going to be kicking ass and doing amazing things. If you have no stress or anxiety, something so easy, someone's just telling you, yeah, you can be healthy by eating on the couch, doing nothing, not changing any habits. You're not going to change. You're enabling someone. At the other end, where it's just as low in terms of performance, are the people who are saying you have to be perfect. You have to cut out everything. You have to think about every single meal and every single ingredient. And that amount of stress actually disables the action. So you want to, as I talk about, learn to expand your comfort zone. So it's 1 foot in, 1 foot out. What is one thing that you do that fundamentally is just difficult for you? Is it eating a vegetable? Is it adding fiber? Is it having protein? Is it being better about sleep? Is it being better about hydration? There are a lot of different, foundational habits, but don't try and do them all at once. What is the one that is hard? And I would even argue, what's the one that's the hardest? So much of what I talk about is just different approaches to like see your problems easier. I talk about inversion. So inversion is the idea of starting at the end. When we create our plans, oftentimes we start at the beginning. We have a big goal and a big vision. I like to ask people, imagine 6 months from now, you failed. Why? And then you ask people, okay, this is why you failed. What are you going to do about it to do it differently? But now let's start there. If people can identify where they know that they are weak, if they can identify where they know they have the most struggle, instead of living in complete optimism, which is good. You want to be optimistic, but you have to be optimistic and you have to be realistic. You have to know yourself to know where you struggle, because this stuff is hard for people. And all I care about is helping people. But if I'm going to help people, we have to have the hard conversations about when do you become your own worst enemy? And then how can we make it easier to get yourself out of your way? Because habit change is based on a very, very simple principle. Make it so easy that it's hard to fail. Because when you do that and you become confident, you can change your behavior. And when you change a behavior, then you start to abandon and leave behind the things that don't serve you anymore. I think too often people with wonderful intentions give people this plan of how they live now, and they forget about where they started. If you were to talk to yourself 10 years ago, 20 years ago, I bet the way that you eat and the way that you think has progressed dramatically.
Oh yeah, I've learned so much. Over the past 4 months, I've changed my opinion on maybe not dramatically so, but I've definitely like updated my views on many different things.
Right. But if you didn't have that experience, you probably wouldn't be where you are right now, and it probably wouldn't be so easy. So a lot of people look at a lot of these things as failures, and they just try and like erase the failure. I wasn't able to do this diet. I wasn't able to eat. I wasn't able to exercise. These are learning experiences, right? I talk about the book Grit by Angela Duckworth. Like, we have to build grit. And part of building grit is understanding, like, if you have not succeeded yet, it does not mean that you are not a healthy person. It does not mean you cannot change your body. It means that there are lessons. And we have to start opening our eyes and realizing, like, how many times are we just replaying the same diet, but with a different script, right? And the same diet tends to be, we're going to identify one villain. We're going to give you a reason why it is the end all be all.
Yeah.
And if you stop eating this one food, or if you add this one food, suddenly you'll just become healthier. And like, we just keep repackaging for the last 50 years. You can go back to the 70s and the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. Like, we keep on repackaging a different villain instead of asking ourselves, like, all right, what are we learning from each of these? Where are these trapdoors? Call them trapdoors, right? Because like, the outside person can see it. Our best friends are like, they know when we screw up, and they can see it easily. But just like the cartoons, like when you're on a trapdoor, the viewer can see it so easily, but you can't. Becoming aware of those trapdoors, seeing them clearly, so that you can start making these more practical changes, not go to these extremes, not try to be perfect, and then build habits. And then, because you're confident, because you're changing, abandon the things that don't serve you anymore. That's how change. We don't want to start where like the perfect version of us is, because like then the lessons aren't crystallized in a way that we won't slip back in old behaviors. We have to kind of go slow to go fast with people. And I think so many diets just want people to start at the end, and they're not ready for it, right? They're starting in the deep end. They're starting with calculus or geometry, and they don't know how to add or subtract yet.
I think part of the problem, though, is that the progress is slow. It's meant to be slow, and so people, I think, want to take more extreme action, especially at first, because I feel like they want to see a more pronounced effect off the bat, to then reinforce, so that they have something to reinforce their behaviors.
You're 100% correct. And if it wasn't for people always ending up in a worse situation or back where they started, I would say, yeah. But how many times do people like want that quick win? They get that quick win and they slide back to where they started, and they repeat the same process again, right? Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and not changing.
Yeah.
And at what point do you just realize this approach is the same thing repackaged over and over again? Fascinating study at UCLA that looked at dieters versus non-dieters. And what they found is, in the first 6 months, dieters kick the non-dieters' ass. They lose way more. But then when you zoom out 1 year, and then when you zoom out 2 years, in some cases, the non-dieters even beat the dieters.
Wow.
And what's happening is, when you go on that diet, your weight drops. But then you get to that point where you burn out, you had too many restrictions, it's not sustainable, and then you completely fall off the wagon.
Yeah, I blew my diet.
Right. And then but the amount of time that people spend on a diet is way shorter than the amount that they spend off the diet. And it's not even close. Sometimes you have people on your off diet for 3 to 4 times the amount of time that you're on a diet. And you just have to say, like, this is a repeating pattern, right? And the UCLA study just like makes that so clear, that the average person will gain anywhere from 1 to 3 pounds per year. That's average weight gain, but it's like slow death, right? Because from the time you're 20 to the time you're 40, you wake up and you're 40, and you're like, oh my goodness, I've gained 20 to 40 pounds. What happened? It's rarely just a single year. It's a slow accumulation. But the people who go on diets can end up gaining more than that, because the amount that they gain when they are off is so much more significant than when they're on.
Because their oscillations are way more extreme.
Right. And the whole idea of this book took me 9 years to write. And the fundamental question I started with was like, what would a world with no diets look like? Because there's this weird, scary epidemiological trend where, if you go back to the 1950s and 60s, 7% of men and 14% of women were on diets, right? When you look at surveys. And obesity in the 60s and 70s was about 10 to 13%.
Yikes.
Today, 40% of men and 60% of women are on multiple diets. Obesity in the United States alone is at 45%. Overweight and obesity is at 75%. And if you look outside the US over the last 3 decades, the number of people in all the other countries have become more overweight as well.
Wow.
So the trend is there, and then you're like, oh, of course, it makes sense, right? So about 4 times more people are dieting, and our obesity rate has increased 4 times. But that's not the whole story. We got up to about 40% of people dieting in the 1980s. So for the last 40 years, half of the country has been dieting, and we continue
to get fatter. Damn.
And we end up getting into these almost religious dogmatic camps where I think the wellness industry is designed for good. You're out here trying to help people. I'm out here trying to help people. But at some point, the wellness industry has become more about industry than wellness. And we are getting all these extreme diets, and this is physics. With every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So we're seeing diets that are just made up out of nowhere that get their zealots, and then it means there has to be an opposite camp who's angry about it. And that opposite camp digs in against them, which means the people who are for this diet, rather than just being, this is what works for me, become even more passionate about it. So you get these people who are deeply rooted in almost a religious ideology. And then those polar opposites spawn off other opposites. If we were to look at the total number of diets that are based on extreme fringe behaviors over the last 10 years, the scatter plot is insane.
Whoa.
And the question is like, are these diets really helping us? And the answer is no. Are the extreme positions really helping us? No. Is the fear really helping us? No. Right? And it's just like, but we can't help ourselves. And because like we're in a media cycle, you talk about social media, it's like you got the people in the grocery stores, news headlines, they need headlines. So they got to grab the most salacious thing that they can find to just get clicks instead of being able to tell a more balanced story. And all it has done is just left people fundamentally confused in a food environment that is hard enough, right? Foods are designed to make us eat more. Takeout can be too caloric. There are all these things out there that makes it hard. That's hard enough. We don't need to be confused about like which dietary camp we get in, or if someone eats differently than I do, get so angry that I need to fight with you. Who cares what they eat? Are they happy? Are they healthy? There's a lot of things out there that I disagree with. People will get upset at me because I'm very much agnostic when it comes to diets, because I've seen so many things work, right? Years ago, there was this Super Bowl of studies where they compared the low carb, the low fat, and the vegan, and the Weight Watchers approach, and the zone approach to like an equal amount of protein, carbs, and fats. And there was all this hype of like what I think it was in the journal of I think it was in JAMA. So like, what's the best diet, right? Let's just put them all against one another, and all of them essentially had the same outcome. The differentiator was like what was most sustainable, which is such a boring outcome. And it should have been the most liberating thing in the world, because it should have been like, okay, like I'm not vegan. I love red meat. But if you're vegan and you're happy eating that way and you can sustain it and you're making sure you don't have your like micronutrient deficiencies, why do I care if you're healthier? Right? I don't believe in some of the things that people recommend in terms of what they do from a nutrition standpoint. And I think some of the science that people put behind it is bogus. But if you're happier and you're healthier and you're not, your lipid profile looks good, your blood work looks good, you're healthy, who gives a shit? Especially if people have like figured out how to like do something sustainably.
Yeah.
And there's so much shame and guilt, right? Like if you don't eat a certain way, if you eat carbohydrates, if you don't fast, right? There's all this shame and guilt, and then people feel bad. Average person stresses 7 times every time they eat.
Wow.
7 times, right? We are in a stressed out enough society. Like I should not be shaming someone for eating takeout. Can they eat it 7 days a week?
Yeah.
No.
I don't care what people eat. I think that they should be able to make the best choice for them with the full breadth of informed consent.
Right.
Right. So like, I get bothered by misinformation from the different dietary camps. And it might seem that I have a leaning towards like a more anti-vegan stance, but I've seen just as many lunatics from the carnivore camp come over onto my...
Both sides.
Both sides.
Everyone gets angry.
Yeah. And so for me, it's about dispelling a lot of these myths. One of the things for me that I've really like completely updated my view on is the value of carbohydrates in the diet.
They're so important for most people. You can live without them, but man, I wouldn't want to.
Yeah. And one of the first things that I did, so like when I went on this like cut, so to speak, this little fat loss journey that I've been on for the past couple of months, which has been very easy. And I mean, I've had to make some sacrifices. The largest one being like, I don't not eat out anymore, but I eat out less.
Right.
But I really I discovered the value, and I saw very, very plainly the value of carbohydrates in the diet. And I looked at the data, but I also looked at what bodybuilders do for show prep, right? Because success leaves clues.
A lot of carbs.
Yeah, success leaves clues. And I was like, these guys have the most control of anybody over their body composition. Their level of diligence and ability to micromanage everything from like fluid balance to their performance in the gym to, what have you, is just like astounding. Like they're the OG biohackers in my view. Like as a source of inspiration and information, they're a highly underrated group for all people, not just people who aspire to be bodybuilders, for everybody.
Right.
And so I noticed that, one of the first macronutrient for them to cut is fat, right? I'm not, and they don't go on fat-free diets. This is a really important distinction. They cut enough fat so that they're still hitting the minimal effective dose of what they need to keep their hormones optimal, to absorb fat-soluble vitamins and other, phytochemicals and things like that, to prevent gallstones, so they're not eating a no-fat diet, but they cut the fat calories and they optimize for carbohydrates, particularly early on in the process. But that's so that they can sustain their performance in the gym.
Correct.
Yeah,
people will point and be like, oh, bodybuilders take steroids. Some of them do.
Yeah.
Right? Let's be honest. Like the pros, they definitely do. Those people are super physiologically big. You can't get that big and that lean. But the tenets of bodybuilding have been around, as you said, for a long time, right? Like I think evidence that just leaves clues. And what people need to understand is that, while both are important, diet and exercise in terms of fat loss and overall health, diet is going to play a bigger role. But when you think about diet and you think about exercise and training, the design of it is to build or maintain as much muscle as possible. Diet is to help you burn as much fat as possible. But if you cut off your diet in a way that affects your training, you start losing significantly more muscle and you start looking worse and feeling worse, and it makes the process much harder. So carbohydrates are a wonderful source of fuel, especially for exercise. So if you're cutting that fat, that's the most calorically dense, right? 9 grams per calorie. So it is twice the amount of calories as a single gram of carbohydrate or fat. So by doing that, you can cut off less fat. Like you said, you're not going no fat, while still keeping your carbs higher so your performance is going to be better. And for most people, not for everyone, you enjoy eating carbohydrates a little bit more. And the idea with fat loss that a lot of people just refuse to understand, or I think it's not celebrated enough, is that the goal of fat loss is to eat as much as possible and still lose fat.
Right.
And then when fat loss stops, when it plateaus, make one adjustment, see if it picks up and goes. We try and adjust all these variables. That would be like doing a scientific study where you have 20 different variables and then trying to assume which one made the difference. No way would that ever work out. So what you want to do especially when you're trying to, burn fat or build muscle, is you want to manipulate one thing at a time, because people will prematurely change things and it will cut off their progress prematurely as a result. You might be able to go ahead and cut off, let's say 10 to 20 grams of fat, right? So 100 to 200 grams of calories per day. And from that one change, if you do it a couple meals, then you double that up to about 500, start seeing results. And you're still training at a high intensity, so you're burning more calories during your exercise. And you might be able to sustain that for a while. Wait until the fat loss stalls, and then maybe cut a little bit more fat, and then maybe start cutting carbs, but do it in almost like a step stool incremental fashion. And that's how you avoid these plateaus. People will start themselves at zero, right? They cut out all the fat or they cut out all the carbs, and they'll see this huge whoosh of weight loss. Some of it real, a lot of it water weight, right? Because they went to zero.
Especially when you cut carbs.
Right. But then what happens? Your training starts to feel like crap. Hormonally, you're off because serotonin levels drop, right? Sex drive is going to literally just completely plummet when you cut out all carbohydrates. You don't feel so good. And then worst of all, you look at the scale and it stops moving. And then what are you going to cut? you're probably going to cut protein because like you can't have something that has like no fat when you already have no carbs.
Right.
When you're at 0 carbs, there's no more carbs to cut.
Yeah.
And you can't just eat straight, dry chicken breast every day. I mean, you can try, but you're going to end up failing. And, people prematurely back themselves in the corner because they think they need to go to the extreme.
Yeah.
Whereas like the buffer you give yourself is what allows your body to metabolically adapt. The buffer you give yourself is what allows your body to still perform at a high level and make changes so that you can play the long game. Play the long game because it might start slow, by the way, progress, but there will be so much more that you can still adjust to keep making progress as opposed to just getting into a point where there's nothing more you can change with your diet other than leaving the diet completely.
Yeah. I mean, just to kind of put numbers to this, if like 2 tablespoons of oil, that's about 240 calories.
Depending on the oil. Yeah.
Yeah. Depending on the oil.
Yeah.
If you because my diet was like replete with like, lots of extra virgin olive oil, butter here and there, heavy cream. Now, I'm not saying that any of these foods are bad. I love extra virgin olive oil.
They are perfectly healthy. We should not confuse things you need to do to lose fat with things you need to eat that are healthy.
100%. And I will also add to the mix that like I was perfectly healthy before I underwent this fat loss phase, right? I was totally within the healthy range for a male, between 10 and 20% body fat. I was like 15, 16%. But you cut out 2 tablespoons of oil. That's 240 calories, right? Of fat. And right there, you're losing half a pound of fat a week, right? You throw into the mix 20 minutes of walking on a treadmill to burn another 200 calories. Right there, you're at a pound of fat loss a week, which is like astonishing to me, But the problem is you go to like restaurants and whether it's like the cream sauces or, as we discussed, the oils, you go to any, like if you eat breakfast out, like, and you get a scramble or an omelet, like chances are, they use more than a tablespoon of oil, maybe 2, to make your eggs. There are all these like little tweaks that that you can do that make it just like, I mean, I don't want to say effortless because obviously some people are still going to struggle with this. Like everybody's different. But for me, I mean, it was just like, it was night and day. Like the fat just like melted off just from like just some basic modifications. And it got me from like 15 to 16% down to 11 or almost like 10%, like maybe 10.5. And then you have to start being
over how much time?
Over like 2 months.
Yeah. So, and that's part of it, right? Most people never even make it to 8 weeks.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, and you also didn't change up 20 different things.
I didn't.
Inherently, you're showing exactly what needs to be done.
But slower is better. Go into that a little bit because like a lot of people think that like the faster the weight loss occurs, the better, the more successful you are. It's actually like there are many reasons to actually want the weight loss to progress on at a more slower pace. Right.
And part of it is what we talked about with The Biggest Loser. So you can lose weight really fast. And if it happens by making these small adjustments, that's great. But if you lose the weight too quickly, the metabolic adaptation that we talk about shifts in a way that, your body starts fighting against you because it was too much too soon. And a lot of people throw around terms like hormonal imbalance and things like that loosely. But these things do play a role in the idea of calories in, calories out, right? Everyone has this argument of like, oh, calorie. No one's saying all calories are equal, right? What we're saying is we look at total energy balance. And by energy balance, we mean, what is the thermic effect of food, right? Protein is going to be much more metabolized than carbs or fat. Protein and fiber are also going to leave you more sated. You're going to be more satisfied, which means you're much less likely to eat more food. So all of these foods work together in a way to determine how much you eat and how much you burn. And then when you clear the balance sheet, calories are going to matter. But the things that you eat influence how many calories you have. The things that you eat determine, right? 100 calories of protein, up to 30% of that could be metabolized.
Yeah.
So 70 calories might hit you. The fiber, especially fiber and nuts, nearly about 80% of those will only be metabolized. So same idea. So you have 100 calories, only 80 of them might hit because of the fiber that you find in nuts. So there are all these different things that you can do that will influence not only how many calories hit your body, but then how hungry you are later. A big thing that I talk about in the book is like you have to learn to eat in a way where you feel satisfied. And when you do these extreme diets, right, where you cut out and you try and lose so fast, you're not satisfied because you can't eat anything that you enjoy. And psychologically, you burn out. And when you start losing too quickly, you can have other dominoes that fall. That losing weight itself fast is not problematic if you can keep your metabolism in check, if your body doesn't get pissed off. But all the things that happen around it is where you get screwed. So the idea that, when you can't train as hard, you don't have the energy to work out. When you get burnt out, it can affect sleep. And sleep is one of those things, you've talked on the podcast before. It has such a dramatic effect on exercise and on diet, right? Just one night of getting less than 6 hours of sleep can affect insulin and cortisol. 2 nights of getting less than 6 hours of sleep can cause changes in your brain that make you more insatiable, right? So it's like mind control. When you don't get enough sleep, you are hungrier.
Oh, absolutely.
Not only that, when you don't get enough sleep, you crave the foods that you should try and eat less of. These foods that are high in sugar, salt, and fat. So when you don't get enough rest, and the not enough rest might be a byproduct of how miserable you are from your dieting because you're burnt out and your body is just not feeling good, your sleep can get affected. And this becomes a vicious cycle where suddenly your sleep's affected. You end up eating more and you're still not satisfied. You end up craving more, so you end up eating the stuff that you want to resist. And you think that you can never win. Psychologically, it's just such a mess where people go on this and they end up blaming themselves. And I hate it. They end up blaming themselves as opposed to if you give someone a crappy plan or a blueprint to show how to build something and it's not even they're not even reading the right language, right? They don't have a chance to succeed. And what you did when you lost, your weight, when you did this cut, where you're all right, I'm eating out too much. But even if you're eating at home too much, you could say, I might be using too much oil when I'm cooking.
Yeah.
So I'm going to cut the oil down to a quarter, or I'm going to start using a light spray instead of oil. I'm going to start walking 20 minutes and I'm going to see what happens just from there. Maybe I'm going to cut my fat a little bit more, bump up my carbohydrates, and see how that affects training performance. Oh my goodness, I've got more energy. I'm sleeping better. And then see what happens. And you were able to ride a couple habit changes to 5-6% body fat change over 8 weeks. And the reason was you A, didn't burn out, B, it wasn't too complicated. And C, you saw enough of a change to keep you going.
Yeah, and I was still eating all the foods that I love.
Right.
By the way.
And that's the key. The key with a great diet is A, don't make it so restrictive that you feel you need to be perfect. This idea, this drive for perfection is going to get you to fail. You can't be perfect at anything in life. I don't know why we think we can be perfect with our diet, especially with parameters that are very, very difficult. The idea should be to improve your diet. B, include things that you love.
Yeah.
Because if you are not eating some foods that you love, I can promise you at some point you're going to rage against the machine. If you love pasta and you go on a ketogenic diet, and you never eat pasta, I promise you're going to be craving pasta. And the moment you eat it, you're going to feel like you can't have carbs because you're going to blow up, you're going to be bloated. And it's not that you can't eat carbs, it's the fact that you cut carbs out from your life. And that one meal made you overreact to thinking what was happening in your body instead of realizing the reason you're having such a strong reaction now rather than before is because of what you cut out.
Yeah.
Right? It's a manipulation. People go ahead and eat foods that are okay for them, but they get demonized. Then when they go on these restrictive diets, they eat something and they're oh no, I feel terrible. I'm well, did you always feel terrible when you ate this? No, there is a place to eat some of the foods you love some of the time and then create these habits and then change them. And then once they become automatic, become routine, right? What it feels like it's, I imagine a lot of things that you have changed feels easy now.
Oh yeah, I've integrated them 100%.
So if you wanted to add more things, or if you saw now things that were new limitations, then you could attack them with more focus and more intensity. Diet is not a game of sweeping everything clean and trying to make a change, right? It is about finding your comfort zone. Take on 1 to 2 things that are difficult for you, which means identify the 1 to 2 things that are difficult for you or where you think is holding back. Wait until you master those 2. And when you do and they're easy, add more. The point of writing this book wasn't being eat takeout. No, the point of being if you try and get rid of all of these things all at once and right away, you're going to end up right back where you started.
100%. Yeah, I mean, even for example, extra virgin olive oil, which I freaking love, right? I would typically go like former me would go and get a salad at Sweet Green or whatever, and I would get, a salad dressing made with extra virgin olive oil, balsamic vinegar, lemon, and you're basically leaving your fat loss fate in the hands of some like underpaid, dude behind the glass, right? Or woman or female. And like those, like whether you want your dressing light, medium, or heavy, like you have no idea. And that calorie swing is probably massive,
Huge.
right? Between light and medium and heavy, and there's no specificity. So what I would do, one of the things that I switched up just to illustrate and give an example, like I would get my salads to go with no dressing, and then I would bring them home, and I would put a teaspoon of extra virgin olive oil on my salad, right? I still want my extra virgin olive oil. I still want the fat in my salad to absorb all the fat-soluble carotenoids that I know are beneficial to my eye health and my brain health from that salad. But now I'm using a teaspoon of extra virgin olive oil as opposed to who knows how many tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil, which is like, that's hundreds of calories right there.
And that's the one thing. I don't love calorie counting. It works. I don't love measuring things out. Measuring your oils is probably one of the easiest changes. I'm not saying you can't have it.
Yeah.
Like literally you can pour it just into the cap. That's a great, if you don't want to grab a tablespoon,
100%.
pour it in the cap, you do it on top. Or you ask for it on the side. And what you're going to see is like with a salad at Sweet Green, you're going to get 2 or 3 of those little salad dressing containers. You are using one and you are not using all of it. Right. So it's just like sometimes, because not everyone gets to go home for lunch.
Yeah.
Right. It's just like, how do we make this practical, sustainable, and doable so that it's not like you're having a dry salad? That's not what we're suggesting.
Definitely not.
We're just suggesting don't go ahead and make yourself your own worst enemy. If you're going to eat out, but do it intelligently and do it in a way where you know what you are doing for your body. Don't throw everything in there, right? Like load it up with a good green base, get some proteins, get like one of the things I talk about, like ordering a +1. The thing about dieting is that like protein and fiber are your staples, right? Protein and fiber are great for you. Good luck finding much research suggesting that it's not linked to every possible good health outcome that you can find.
You occasionally get a wacko on social media who's like, we only need 50 grams of protein a day.
But even that is better than what some people get. And I would, they're going to say that because they're going to argue that it's going to hurt your kidneys. Isn't true. Okay, if you have renal failure, please work with your doctor to figure out how much protein your body can handle. But at this point, we have so many studies that like there just is no evidence of protein causing it. And when we look at muscle, when we look at fat loss, when we look even at longevity because of what happens with sarcopenia, people worry about having too much protein, but a lot of the current concerns about having too much protein as we age is actually based on animal studies. And what we find is that as we get older, we actually need a little bit more protein because of how nitrogen breaks down in our body.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, and it's super important, and it's good for you. Not to mention, the more protein you eat, the less likely you are to overeat on the stuff that you don't want to eat. And the one thing I'm going to stress is most people need to slow down eating. This is the one, I put 500 people through the program in this book. And the hardest thing for them to change was I told them that they got to take 20 minutes to eat their meal. Average person eats a meal in 8 minutes.
That's probably me.
8 minutes. And here's why that's a problem. Hunger is it's a neurochemical signal that goes from your stomach to your brain, right? We have a satiety center in our stomach, and then we're eating food and we break it down and certain molecules fill it up more, protein and fiber, right? It becomes like a gel. It's like the old animal, the little capsule that you would throw in like the bathtub that would expand.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
That's what fiber does. And protein's a thicker molecule that builds up, so it leaves you more sated. But what it does is it fills up your stomach and it sends a signal to your brain being like, hey, I'm full. But that's not a Learjet, right? That's not the express highway. It takes about 20 minutes. So how often do people eat and eat and be like, I'm not full yet. Eat. They get done. They're like, oh my goodness, I'm so overstuffed. They took too long. When you take that 20 minutes, this is why a lot of people outside the US tend to, way less. They take a lot longer to eat their meals. They take their time to slow down, eat, enjoy, be present in the food. And there are a couple different things that are happening. When we're going too fast, we're not getting that signal to know that we're full. 2, we're probably, if we're eating that quickly, we're not paying attention. We're doing work, we're scrolling social media, we're watching TV, and our eyes are there to help us, right? We take in sensory information in the same way that being in a restaurant creates cues that make us want certain foods. Our eyes are there to look at a plate and see how much food is on there. There was a study that looked at what happens when people can see their food versus when they can't, right? So basically the plate is covered and they're having them eat ad lib. So basically eat whatever you want that's on the plate. But in one situation, they're able to look at the food. In the other, they can't see it. And the people who couldn't see their food ate significantly more calories. There was no different parameters. All that was different is they were paying attention to what they're eating versus not. You can obviously, that's akin to just like being distracted while you're eating. Your eyes are helping provide more of that signal saying like, hey, this is probably enough food for you. And when you start adding all of these things up, you see how we get in these vicious cycles of eating and overeating and not wondering why any of this stuff happens. So the main point was, one, pay attention, but two, protein and fiber. Those are your staples. If you like carbs, you can eat more carbs, but then you have to cut out more fat. If you like fat, you can eat more fat, but then you have to cut out consistently more carbs because the fat is more calorically dense. But this is why low fat or low carb both work. Another amazing study, the Diets Fit study. We're doing low carb versus low fat. Let's do it for a year. Let's see who loses more weight. When it came down to it, the low carb dieters lost 0.25 pounds per week. The low fat dieters lost 0.21 pounds per week. So a whopping 0.04 of a calorie difference. Again, the lesson, it doesn't matter if you want to go low fat or low carb. Choose the foods that you're going to enjoy and just eat them.
Yeah. Could have been water weight too.
Right. Without a doubt. Right. We're stripping out those carbs.
Yeah.
Carbohydrates hold glycogen. Glycogen holds water, pulls water into the muscle. It's part of why carbs help fuel our performance. But the idea is like, there's no need to even get in this battle. Just make sure that you're on this sliding scale of protein and fiber are the basis of your meal in general. If you want carbs, add that, but have less fat. If you want fat, add that, but have fewer carbs. And you just adjust the dial. And you could do it between meals, right? You don't have to live in this, right, the dichotomous thinking, the black and white universe of like, well, I'm a low carber, I'm a low fat. Well, no, why can't I just like be an omnivorous creature who enjoys certain foods, and at a certain meal, my body's telling me to eat something that I am craving. So I'm going to eat in a way that I feel satisfied, but I'm going to be mindful enough to eat the type of foods that are going to fill me up, but also mindful enough to not restrict myself so much that I end up hating the plan I'm on, counting the days till I'm done with it.
Yeah. Well, what about when it comes to choosing a protein, right? Like, I think a lot of people out there might hear eat more protein and incorporate more, I don't know, like sausages or ribeyes or hamburgers or what, like protein has many faces
right
today in the standard American diet. Full fat, dairy, which, the data is strongly in favor of as a healthful food. I mean, I love a good full fat Greek yogurt.
Delicious.
Cheese, I go hard on the cheese sometimes. So like, define like the kind of protein source that you're talking about for us?
So I'll say this, protein is protein. So I wouldn't say that any protein is off limits, but most people want more food on their plate, for better or for worse. It is what it is. So when you have a fattier cut of protein, that means the energy density, so how many calories are in that, is going to be a lot higher, which means the total amount of food you can put on your plate is going to be less. Now that's okay, but you just have to know, like, it means that like optically it's going to look like you're eating less. There's nothing wrong with eating, a ribeye or having that, full fat cheese.
Yeah.
The issue is anytime you are selecting a fattier cut of protein, the total amount of food you can eat in a meal is probably going to be less just from a calorie standpoint, for the same reason that we are cutting down on oils because it loads up calories. Those full fat proteins, not bad, nothing wrong with them, delicious, but it limits then how much you can eat overall in your meal. Right. So if you want to have it, if you want the ribeye, if you want the cheese, if you want, a big old pork sausage, you can, but then realize that idea of the +1 that I talked about, the idea of I get an extra serving of fats or I get an extra serving of carbs, that's essentially your extra serving of fat. So you now have to just add some fiber to that meal, and that's all that you're getting. Whereas if you choose a lean source of protein, so you're just the things that don't have as much fat in it, whether it's a chicken breast, whether it's going to be an egg white. There's nothing wrong with egg yolks, guys. They're fine, but the white itself is just the protein. Whether it's a type of fish or seafood that's going to be lower in fat, you give yourself the flexibility to add a fat or add a carbohydrate so that you can have a lower energy density meal. You can have more diversity in your plate. You can load up more on there. So I don't think it's about seeing good versus bad proteins. I think it's more about just assessing how much do I want to eat And if I just have a giant ribeye and maybe some vegetables, is that going to be enough to satisfy me? I would argue if you're taking the time to eat and slowing down and savoring it, yes. For eating in 8 minutes, probably not. Or if you're just going to be upset with the way your plate looks because you want to see more food on there, those fattier cuts of protein just mean that there's going to be less food overall on the plate.
Well, that's the thing. I think if your goal is fat loss, then opting for leaner proteins gives you more. It gives you more flexibility, and it allows you to eat more volume.
And that's a big, right? Like when you feel like deals. You're eating a lot,
yeah,
you're not hungry. And like when we lose fat, we start to become hungrier.
Yeah.
The body's a little bit fucked like that, right? That's where leptin, that's the hormone that affects fullness. It is, it drops and you kind of just start craving more food. And this is where like understanding your brain chemistry really matters. You need to give your body the type of foods that outsmart your brain so that you don't have those same hunger signals, because eventually your body will adapt. That's the beautiful thing. We have such resilient, amazing bodies. It blows my mind when people have a dessert or some sugar and we think that we're going to become inflamed and die.
Actually, the funny thing about getting as lean as I've gotten, so I've cut out a fair amount of fat calories, and inevitably you're going to end up cutting out a decent amount of carbohydrates compared to like my baseline diet, certainly. But when you go and you because this is not I'm not like a professional bodybuilder or anything. So when I travel or I do want to go to a restaurant, like I'm enjoying myself. I'm eating the carbohydrates. When you do eat those higher carbohydrate meals after you've been low carb for a while, you look like jacked.
You look amazing
with a workout.
You look amazing.
Like the photo that I posted of myself on my birthday that people can go and check out on my Instagram. I posted it May 29th.
I believe the kids call it a thirst trap, but
it was a bit of a thirst trap. It was a bit of a thirst trap. But I had just gotten back I was on a trip. So I was on a cruise with my friends in Miami. And I was every single meal was like eaten out at a restaurant. I was eating a ton. And I had a workout when I got back to Miami, like back to shore. And, I think a lot of people would think, oh man, I blew my diet. I went on vacation. But it's actually the best thing that you could do for your metabolism, right? You kind of maybe potentially reverse some of that metabolic adaptation. It's amazing for your psychological state.
Big time for mindset. Yeah.
Big time for mindset. And for your physique too. Like you work out with all those carbohydrates replete in your musculature, and you're like, it's like that's what bodybuilders do. But again, success leaves clues, right? Like there's always the carb up before the show, because it's like drawing the carbs back into your muscle with the water and then getting a good workout in. It's like the best thing.
You feel amazing. And there's even research that suggests that this can work. There's a study called the Matador study, where essentially they compared people who are just consistently dieting with people who go 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. So essentially 2 weeks at a deficit and 2 weeks a little bit looser around maintenance, but like not going crazy. Now, this isn't to say that this was superior, but the people who were doing the 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off had the same results. And when you zoomed out longer term, they were more likely to stick to the diet. Again, for the same reason that psychologically they didn't burn out.
Interesting.
They probably had moments where they felt great. It was easier to maintain, because instead of being like, I'm just going to be on this plan forever, it's like, all right, I got this 2 week sprint. And then for the next 2 weeks, you're not eating like an a-hole. You're not like doing your body a disservice, right? Like
you're not going off the rails.
Right. A lot of people be like, no, I always want to eat sugar and fat. I'm like, no, you don't. No, you don't. You get to that because you get so frustrated and so burnt out that you try so hard and you don't see the results that you want, that you get frustrated, right? People get frustrated. We are emotional creatures. We are psychological creatures. The mind leads the body. No one has gone and treated themselves like crap and then been like, oh, I love eating this way. I feel amazing. No, it's a sense of apathy. And I get it. I've been helping people for 20 years. They come to me when they're burnt out and frustrated. I never want them to feel shame or guilt. That's the most human emotion in the world, to try and change something that you care so deeply about. And you can't convince me that the vast majority of people don't care about their health. But a lot of them feel like they've been let down. Now, some of them definitely let themselves down. But, who enabled them with the information and a plan that would allow them to succeed? Who even told them that, a big part, they talk about, like, you got to change your self-perception. A lot of people walk around every single day and think they're not healthy. James Clear talks about this in Atomic Habits, right? We think that we're going to become motivated, and then we're going to take action, and then we're going to change our mindset. But 50 years of human psychology shows us that's not the case. Our mindset is what leads to our action, and our action is what leads to our motivation. And we conflate achieving a goal with being a certain type of person. It's state versus trait. Just because you have not figured out how to be healthy does not mean that you don't care about your health or you can't figure this out. You're just not there yet. The fact that you try a diet, even if it's a bullshit diet, the fact that you listen to a podcast, the fact that even if you buy a completely bogus fat loss supplement doesn't mean that you don't care. It actually shows that you do care. You're spending your hard-earned money. You're just doing the wrong thing. So you have to believe that you're healthy. You have to understand that you just haven't figured out what's worked for you yet. And you got to understand that these, the shame and the blame and the guilt and like quitting and throwing up your hands and thinking it will never be different is like, that's when you're doing yourself a disservice. You might have been wrong, but the only way you're going to get right is A, if you change your self-perception, B, if you try something different, C, if you expand that comfort zone, do something that makes you a little uncomfortable, it's a little bit challenging while still holding on to something. I tell people that like one of the biggest surprises, the last thing I'll cut for people is dessert. Because that's comfort. Brene Brown talked about the importance of vulnerability and being able to grow out of the person that you are right now to who you want to become. And part of that is having a stable foundation. And a line that I throw in the book is like, you do not want to shoot a cannon from a canoe. Do not shoot a cannon from a canoe, right? Because that thing is toppling over. In diet and nutrition, we give people a lot of cool cannons, right? We give them a lot of different ways that they can lose fat and become healthier, but we never give them a battleship to shoot them from. And it's so important for people to be able to think that they can succeed, because patterns of reinforcement show that success breeds success. If you can get someone to succeed small, they will succeed big. But if they fail big, they don't even think they can succeed small. I want to teach people to have those small wins so then they can take on the bigger challenges, but be in a position to succeed. Think about it. When you go into the gym, if you've never worked out before, you don't need to load up a barbell with 300 pounds and say, squat this. You need to have them do like 10 body weight squats times 3 to 4 sets. And if they haven't been trained at all, like they're gonna have trouble sitting down on the toilet the next day. It's very easy to crush someone relative to where they are, right? We have to microdose this discomfort so they become more resilient, right? But with diet, right? Exercise, no one would do that. You don't put someone 300 pounds in the bar and be like, go squat this on day one. Diet, we tell them to change all of these things. We give them the proverbial 300 pounds on the bar. And we're like, why weren't you able to do that? Why not like build them up so they can end up getting rid of these habits that stand in their way, but do it from a position of power. Do it from a position of strength. Don't take away the dessert. Don't make them think that they're going to be miserable their whole life. No, eat some sugar and do these other things and you're losing weight. Holy shit. Right? It's wax on, wax off. Eventually, yeah, you got to drop some of the dessert or eat it less often. You don't have to abandon it completely. I'm never going to tell you that because that's not reality. But I care much less about pushing a dietary dogma and much more about putting someone in a psychological and a physiological state where they can win. That's when people are dangerous. That's when you help them, right? A little bit of knowledge can go a far way, but you got to make sure the person's ready to absorb that knowledge. I imagine that's what you've seen. Imagine what so many people who come on this show seen. It's like, you almost have to reverse engineer. Don't start with where you are right now. And I don't think diets do it on purpose, but the person who's creating that diet or writing it is coming from a position of like, here's my plan that I do right now. But that presupposes they didn't go through all those things that allowed them to get to that place where they're ready to succeed. So we just got to build people up more gradually. And then they're much more likely to slay like the real big things that are hard, or they find that their level of health probably might be good enough, right? Oftentimes people like have a goal in mind and they realize that they just wanted to feel a little bit better. They wanted to sleep a little better. They wanted the energy that they had before. They wanted to be able to work out, and they find happiness was in some place very, very different than they thought, because they thought that happiness was about like losing 50 pounds. It was just about like eating a little bit better and be able to move more.
Yeah.
And that's it. And other people, they wanted to lose 10 pounds and they catch the bug. Right? And they take it as far as they can. And maybe they have athletic pursuits. Maybe they want to compete on stage. Maybe they want to, become super fit, but they do it because they chose it. There's a big thing to, feeling like something is forced upon you as opposed to like, I am ready to take this on now. And I think that needs to be more of the focus. Like, how do we get people where like they want to take it on? Because then I think they're more likely to stick with it. They're going to have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder and not get defeated, not have that learned helplessness that kicks in so many diets where they do just say, screw it, right? They eat whatever. And then like, this is all that I want. I'm like, no, you just truly don't believe you're healthy and you truly don't think there's another way out of this.
Yeah. Got to change the mindset.
Big time.
Yeah.
Right? I imagine in everything you've done, your mindset has probably been shifted quite a bit.
Oh yeah. I really wish that, my hope is for my listeners, to anybody who's like on a weight loss journey, to experience the flexibility that I've experienced with this, and granted, I didn't start out obese. I'm not a middle-aged, postmenopausal woman. I'm not a woman. I'm not a guy who has 6 kids. I'm like, I've got I've got a lot of privilege that I, was able to put towards my efforts, but I've worked very hard to construct my life around this lifestyle as well. But that being said, when you're equipped with the right tools, it doesn't have to be so difficult. And this whole, like when you mentioned dichotomous thinking and how counterproductive that can be, everything doesn't need to be so black or white.
No, the more that people stress over every individual thing that they eat, the less likely they are to succeed. And you said the right word right there. Tools. We tend to think about diets as rules. Rules fundamentally are restrictive.
Yeah.
They are dichotomous. Tools you can use in many different situations. The book outlines 5 tools. I even say it. You don't have to do these 5 tools every single day because that's not realistic.
Right.
The idea for you to be perfect is ridiculous. Now, on your best days, if you can do 5, that's great. On your worst days, if you can do 1, that's great. I think the myth of healthy is that when people who are on the other side of things, right? The person who is overwhelmed, overstressed, overweight, can't figure it out. They look maybe at someone like you, or they look at someone like me, and they're just like, they might think it's easy, right? There might be the metabolism, which we kind of squash, like it's not your metabolism that's holding you back. And I say this knowing that like there is a genetic trait where some people have a higher propensity for obesity. And the people who have this gene, it's been researched, they are more likely to gain fat, but they have no extra difficulty losing fat. So much so that the study researchers said, it shows that even people with this gene do not have a more difficult time.
Do we know how prevalent that gene is?
About 20% of people. So not insignificant. And it makes it easier for them to gain weight, and that sucks. I will never take that away from anyone. And it doesn't mean you can't lose.
Do we know what the mechanism is? Is it like a lack of appropriate satiety signaling?
We don't know yet. It's so tough because like obesity and overweight, there are 4 primary factors, right? So you have like your genetics, hereditary genetics and epigenetics. You've got your environment that you're raised in. You have your activity, and then you have your diet. So when it comes down to it, there's really only 2 things that you can control here. Like, because you can't necessarily control your environment growing up, right? Like how your parents fed you or the people you're around. As a child, you don't. Right. That's just a lottery. Same thing with your genetics and your epigenetics. And we're still learning so much. That is such a vast space that is fascinating, but who knows when we're going to figure that out. So it's like, I talk about being able to control the controllables. We can curse the heavens for like who mom and dad were. Or we could say, all right, I control my activity. I control my diet. I control my mindset. Yeah. But those 3 things are pretty damn powerful. And even if my body is more designed to gain weight, it's not more designed to lose. It doesn't fight against me in losing weight. And that's empowering. It's empowering to know that. So like when it comes to these things, find the tools that serve you well. But what I was trying to say is that, they look at the other people and it's like, man, they must wake up every single day just ready to kick ass and like feel like eating all the healthy foods and they want to train every day. And I said, that is a fundamental deception, right? I would say that about 25% of the time you feel really good. And about 25% of the time you feel like, okay. And about 50% of the time, you probably aren't feeling your greatest for whatever reason. Because like no one wakes up every single day just ready to dominate.
Yeah. We all have our obstacles.
All of them. I
I have chronic low back pain. Sometimes like getting to the gym for me is like, I mean, less so now than in the past, but there were like years that went by where I like barely worked out my legs because I felt so immobilized by the pain that I had in my low back,
But you'd probably do something.
Yeah, I mean,
and that's the thing. The idea here is that like don't let perfection get in the way of progress. It's cliche, but it's so true because a little bit of effort applied consistently, like half the time, and then a moderate amount another 25% of the time, and then like full throttle another 25% of the time gives you some incredible results. You don't need to be completely on top of your game every single day. You just can't have any 0% weeks. Right? We like to think about 100% weeks. I need to be 100%. No. No 0% weeks. No weeks where like on Monday you didn't get a workout in, or on Monday you went to take out and you didn't like use the tools. You got all the oil on it. You took a bath in some oil, and you then get out of it and say, okay, I'm going to apply these two tools. I'm getting back on the train. I've referenced this a few times. There's a doctor, Spencer Nadolsky, who has made a beautiful analogy that like when people fall off the wagon per se, it's kind of like if you were to get a flat tire and then you decide to slash the other three. That's what we do. We have like one bad day. Or it'd be like it's sports, right? Like you have a bad first half, so you decide to mail it in the second half. What makes sports so great is that comebacks are real. And every single week, no matter how your week started, you have an opportunity to have a comeback. Every single week, no matter what you did in the gym or in your kitchen, you can turn it around and you'd end up winning the week. So you can even split up your week into 4 quarters if you want, and ask yourself, like, did I win the majority of those 4 quarters? You don't have to win every single day. You don't have to win every single meal, right? If there's, on average, the average person eats 3 times a day. I would say most probably snack and have 4, but let's say 3 times a day. 7 days in a week, 21 meals. If you went 18 out of 21, let's say 3 meals were just like, whether for better or for worse, they just didn't go the way. You tell me one area of life when you're 90% that you're not absolutely dominating. You can't find it, right? When you're 90% in school, you're getting an A. If you are a 90% passer in football, you're literally the highest completion percentage ever. If you're a 90% hitter in baseball, you're clearly God because 30%, 300 is off the charts. The idea that like when we slip up, we make this mistake. That's the idea. You can't screw this up. The screw up that people make is interpreting these things that are completely normal in life. The day that you miss the workout, the day that you don't eat perfectly, the day that you're too tired to cook because you were working a double shift and you get home, and your reaction, not the action, is the screw up. You can't screw this up is about A, making the plans easier to follow, but B, when you make those decisions that you know aren't your healthiest, show yourself a little bit of grace because your body can handle it.
Yeah.
Your body is resilient. In the same way, if you only worked out once every 2 weeks, you wouldn't be in great shape. But for some reason, if we think we like screw up 1 or 2 meals every 2 weeks, we're suddenly going to be terrible. No.
Yeah.
It's about what we do consistently. Try to win 80 to 90% of your meals. Split up your week into 4 quarters, whatever you have to do so that you see on average you're doing what you need to do. And that is when you will start seeing progress. That's when you'll start building confidence. That's when you'll start being able to tackle bigger habits. And honestly, what we talk about, that's when it becomes easier. It's easier for you. Just drop 5% body fat, and it's easier for you because like you took the slow and steady. And now if you wanted to, you could manipulate other things in your diet. You don't have to. You're probably happy. You're probably feeling great. But if you wanted to get leaner, you're like, this stuff is easy now.
100%.
Like what's the one other habit I'm going to change? Or like, what's the one tweak to my workout? And taking that type of step stool type approach, one thing at a time, that's mastery, right? Mastery is a beautiful thing because again, it makes the hard stuff feel easy so that the things that once felt hard feel more doable. That is what dieting and nutrition is all about. If you're looking at the whole picture of all the things you got to change, it's going to be overwhelming like anything else, right? It's like if you were to start a job, and it was your first day on the job and your boss gave you a massive project and told you had 30 days to do it and you can never sleep and you have to be perfect all the time. you'd be like, oh shit, what did I sign up for? That's the average diet. We started and we're like, here's your 30 days. Timer's going. Don't screw up any meals. Don't do any things you like. Don't go home and rest. Don't do any things you're familiar with that would help you succeed in this. No. Abandon it all and grind yourself to the end. You're not making it.
Yeah.
Like, we got to put people in a position to succeed. We got to stop having people thinking that they're screwing up. We got to show them that there is an easier way. And we got to show them, like, in order for people to take on the more complicated health behaviors, we first have to allow them to succeed at the simple ones.
Yeah.
That allow them to feel control. And then they see, just like you did, oh, geez, that wasn't that hard. I bet when you started this, you probably thought it was going to be harder than it was in terms of like the process itself.
Yeah. Well, also, like, I don't have particularly good genetics, bro. Like, I'm not super strong in the gym. Like, I don't squat, I don't deadlift. I'm not like what anybody would describe as a typical like meathead. And this is the leanest I've ever been, like, in my entire life.
How awesome is that?
Yeah. It's like, it's amazing. Even when I was like in my 20s, I didn't look like the guy in that photo that I posted on my birthday.
41 for the record.
41 for the record. Yeah. And it wasn't difficult, but it did take patience.
Yes.
And consistency. And as you've said so eloquently again and again, the right mindset. Like, I have, just as an example, I have very close friends of mine that every week or so, every other week probably, we love to like get together and have dinner at their house. And me and my friends, we all kind of convene on this one friend's house. And typically what they order is not the healthiest food. It's like pizza, right? And we tend to order like gluten-free pizza, but pizza's pizza.
Pizza's pizza.
Pizza's pizza.
It is delicious.
And I eat it. Like, I eat a lot and I enjoy it. And I think about it as just fuel. I'm enjoying it. It's not just fuel, but also it's not that I've fallen off the wagon or anything like that. I'm going to use it the next day to go have a kick-ass workout in the gym. I'm going to put all that, glucose, glycogen, whatever, to work. And even through the dieting phase, like, it's served me incredibly well.
It helps people, I think, to have those things. Some people call them cheat meals. I don't care what you call it.
No, I don't consider it a cheat meal.
But to me, it's more
part
about
of the program.
Exactly. When you build in things and you realize that, like, this isn't something that's an aberration. Yeah. This isn't something that, like, I need to feel guilty about it. It's actually, I do a pizza night once a week in my family. I got 2 kids. Yeah. And it's like, for them, even, like, I want them to see, like, they shouldn't be demonizing foods. I don't want them walking around being the kids who are, like, afraid of pizza. Because they can handle it. We're not having pizza 7 days a week, but we're having pizza. We're doing these things. And yes, you put it so perfectly. When you start to see these behaviors as not falling off the wagon, but actually as part of the plan, that's a game changer, because we're taught that we can't have these things. So that, again, gets in that fear cycle. It gets in the perfection cycle. It gets in the restriction cycle, as opposed to, like, no, there is actually a time and a place for this. Not all the time, but there's a time and a place. And I think the best thing you said is that you enjoy it. Most people, when they eat these things, right, whether it's the pizza, whether it's the ice cream, whether it's the dessert, they don't. And from an emotional standpoint, this is where, like, mindfulness comes in. When you restrict that enjoyment, it leads to craving. So a lot of times people are like, but I still crave this. And I'm like, well, the first question the researchers said, like, well, how much shame and guilt did you have when you were eating it? Did you process and enjoy it? Because the things that we are able to savor, they actually satisfy those cravings. But I would argue, and there's limited research on this, but I've coached people for 20 years. Most people don't sit and enjoy those meals. And that's why they still crave it, because there's so much guilt, as opposed to just truly being in it, truly enjoying it, and then getting back on with what they normally do. You are not defined by the behaviors that happen every now and then. Yeah. You are defined by the behaviors that you do most often. Everyone freaks out during the holiday season. And I'm like, you don't have to worry necessarily about how you eat during the holidays. You don't want to take the last 2 months of the year off, right? That's a little extreme. But it's okay if you loosen up around holiday parties and enjoy and do those things. But what defines you isn't November and December. It's like, what did you do between January and October? right? In the same way that like when you were on vacation, when you're doing this and you're able to like loosen up a little bit and eat some of these foods and you felt amazing, you look great. Why? Because you actually put yourself in a position when your body was even more readily able to handle all of those foods, right? A fit mind, a healthy body, all of these things just allow you to actually tolerate and have much more leeway, and you have to build up to that. But even when you're at a starting position, you don't have to start from like absolute restriction.
No, but do you think there's value in checking in with yourself at, you know, as you approach a dessert or what have you, to make sure that it is something that you will really enjoy? Because I feel like some people just like putting food into their face.
Yeah,
you know,
you have to. And I even said like it's something we haven't touched upon. I don't view foods black and white. We've talked about that. I don't like the good food, bad food argument. You know, I think some are more caloric than others. If there's one type of food that makes us more likely to eat, because again, we're learning about how to be satisfied, it's the ultra processed foods. I'm not saying you can never have them, right? Again, that will push you towards them. If you choose on your own volition at some point that like you don't ever want those, that's great. Starting from a position of I can't touch these is dangerous because you're more likely to have them. But ultra processed foods are the things that have salt, fat, and sugar added in a way that is designed to make you crave more of that food. It outsmarts our hunger signals. And, you know, there's great research by Kevin Hall that shows like when you put people on these ultra processed diet, they're eating Chef Boyardee and they give 2 plates, right? One has, you know, more whole-based foods. One has the hyper-palatable foods, the ultra-processed foods. They eat about 500 calories more. Now, the craziest part of that study that few people talk about is, which is this wonderful, like they were like in a lab, you guys. Like these people were in there for like 2 weeks. Every single meal is controlled. There are two groups, right? So one are these people eating ultra-processed food. One are eating the minimally processed. All processing is not bad. You guys, like olive oil is a processed food. It's a minimally processed food. Ultra-processed, that means they are adding unnatural amounts of sugar, salt, and fat. And I would even argue the most dangerous ultra-processed foods are the ones that you wouldn't expect.
Like what?
Because we typically think of ultra-processed foods like donuts and baked goods. But the problem is that the big food, if you will, they're putting it in things like bread. Bread is not bad. Bread is delicious. The way we make bread and manufacture bread has added salt, sugar, and fat, which are training our taste buds to then want this in foods that typically do not have these characteristics. When you have a donut, you expect that beautiful mix of, you know, sugar and fat. When you're eating something like a tomato sauce, though, when you're eating something like a piece of bread, that should not be the flavor sensation that you are programmed to have. And those are actually the foods that are most dangerous because it is conditioning us to want to eat foods that taste like that as opposed to knowing what bread should taste like. I love bread. I eat sourdough bread every freaking day.
I generally avoid bread. I avoid gluten, but I'm curious about like what integrating like a nice, like authentic artisanal sourdough
It would be so
might
good.
be like.
Fiber, some prebiotics, and some of those, just great. Like when you make bread the right way, especially if you leave the United States, so many great breads all around. That is a place you're not. If you don't like bread, or if you feel that like bread is a trigger food, that's another thing. That's like you're talking about checking in with yourself. You should know that. But I'm going to answer your question, but then illustrate why you need to check in. So we were talking about these ultra processed foods, and one group is on the ultra processed, one is on like the minimally processed. They then switched the categories, and the people who were initially eating the ultra-processed foods suddenly stopped eating as much. So there's truly, and we do not know yet, something in these foods that when you give people no instructions whatsoever, they just eat more of them. So when we go to have these desserts,
I can probably speculate on what those mechanisms may be. Well, it's like the bliss point, as you've mentioned,
right.
the hyper palatable nature of the foods, but also like you've also touched on how important it is to eat more slowly, right? And so I would surmise that ultra processed foods are probably easier to consume,
definitely
more rapidly. You know,
no, that's a great point
because they're like essentially pre-digested.
It is like it's baby food.
Yeah, it's baby food.
Baby food that keeps you eating baby food.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so when you get in front of these foods, one, I think it's helpful to have a quota in general, whether it's takeout meals, whether it's ultra processed foods. And there's no right answer here. The wrong answer is 20 times a week. But, you want to have them, 2 to 4 times a week. Again, the idea of like being 80 to 90% good. So one, it's like having a bank account, and people are like, oh, that's so much thinking. Like, not really. We all have accounts. We all have boundaries. Boundaries are important in life. In general, you get to set the boundary, but there should be a boundary, because if we don't create a boundary, what's to stop us from being our own worst enemy? A lot of people will talk about intermittent fasting. One of the tools in the book is that, like, I used to be a huge fan of intermittent fasting. I intermittent fasted for about 6 years. I wrote a New York Times bestseller about intermittent fasting in 2012. 11 years ago. That's how long intermittent fasting has been around.
Wow.
I think it can still be helpful for people. A lot of the claims that I thought were true, I think were overstated. I think it's a great tool. The one thing that I think is helpful about intermittent fasting is it creates a boundary on when we eat. And I like to say that you should have an open kitchen, closed kitchen, because so much eating is mindless. It's not intentional. We don't eat because we're hungry. We eat because we're bored. We eat because we're sad.
Yeah.
We eat because we celebrate. We eat because we had a rough day. And a lot of times that stuff happens outside the parameters of when you would normally eat. In the same way that people today are overstressed and overworked because email in a digital universe has meant that there are no confines to work. It used to be a 9-to-5 universe. It is not.
Right.
You got emails waiting for you from the time you wake up to the time you go to sleep.
Boundary rupture.
Yeah. And then food is the same way. You can do hours, but I think hours can be confining. But if you have an open kitchen and a closed kitchen time, all it does is create a boundary of like, this is not a time where I have chosen to eat. And I reference a study in the book that talks about how there was a diet where all they did was they moved breakfast back an hour and a half and they moved their dinner up an hour and a half. No other changes. Not only did people lose weight, they kept the weight off.
Wow. And
that was it. It was we talk about like, oh, people want the results. Like the results came from simply just creating boundaries. And it wasn't that like someone had like a 12-hour eating window or 16-hour eating window. It was just like, after this time, I don't eat because I don't eat. And if I'm hungry, I'll drink some water. I go to sleep. We mindfully eat. So a lot of times it's like, if you are craving something, ask yourself, A, why you're craving it. B, are you going to enjoy it? But then C, drink some water, go for a walk, do something mentally stimulating. Hunger oftentimes is boredom. So it doesn't matter if it's listening to music or calling a friend or even potentially scrolling social media. The things that we do that can make sure that we are truly hungry are important to prevent us from being our own worst enemy, because if it's open season and we just want to eat everything at any time, we don't truly enjoy the things when it's the time to enjoy them. I want people to enjoy food. I don't want people to be afraid of sugar. I don't want them to be afraid of any individual food. And I want them to be in control to the point that when they are choosing to eat something that is not healthful, they don't have to feel bad about it because they're doing it for the right reasons. They're doing it so they can enjoy it, and they're doing it in a way that it's not so frequent that it's going to do harm. The moral compass of anyone who is in this field is help people become healthier while at the same time limiting the amount of harm they can do to themselves. I would argue it's not healthy to restrict someone from dessert, because if they enjoy it or it's social or it's something that brings good memories or brings them joy, why would you take that away? Everyone talks about a diet being a lifestyle, but how often do we check in with people and ask them what they want their life to look like?
Yeah, or institute some parameters on the dessert. If it's something that you're eating 7 days a week, right? 7 nights a week, maybe bring it down to like 3 nights a week.
And that is the perfect way to go, right? It's not the zero. It's, listen, when we did that inversion, right? You start at the end.
Yeah.
I ask you, what was it? For a lot of people, right, it's lunch. Lunch is such a huge troublesome meal. Or for a lot of people, it's, I eat dinner, but then like after dinner, I sit down and probably just go to town on a lot of desserts, or I open a bag of chips and I eat that. All right. What's going to happen if you went from 7 days a week to 3? It's going to be hard. But the results, the change of that is dramatic. It's no different than why, no matter what you think about artificial sweeteners or plant-based sweeteners, you're going to get arguments on both sides of this, right? If someone is drinking 3 full sugar colas a day and they switch to, 2 diet sodas a day, I'm not saying the diet soda is the best thing in the world. I am saying they're probably going to lose weight and feel better because they have lowered the volume and they have substituted something that is non-caloric
100%.
with something that was caloric. Is the goal to get them to have less than 2? Of course. But if you ask them to go to 0, they're not going to do it. Do you want to help people or do you want to be on a high horse?
Exactly.
I just want to help people. And the goal should be, let's help people make behavioral changes, because then they will want to change it on their own. Because, someone who's drinking soda or Coke or Pepsi or whatever it is you want to call it, pop for the Midwesterners, right? They love that stuff. It's hard for them to give it up. But when they start drinking water and other stuff, they feel better.
Yeah.
They really do. And people will ditch it, but you got to do it gradually. And just shaming people or being like, you're fat or you're not motivated, that's not a way to convince someone.
Yeah.
Right? And I've learned this the hard way. I've been coaching people for 20 years. I used to think that you could be militant and just try and tell people, and you do it from a place of love where you just want what's best for them. But if behavioral change was easy, everyone would do it. We have no shortage of diet books. I truly was not sure if I'd ever write a diet book again. I wanted to write this book, but I didn't want it to be a diet book. I wanted it to be a psychology book. But selling a psychology book about nutrition is not an easy sell. Right? But you want to change people's habits. You want to show them why they're struggling so that they can see it clearly, so they can come to the decisions on their own. And then they can feel really confident that they can make these changes. And I don't care who you are. I've worked with high-level athletes. I've worked with big-name celebs. And most people will be surprised by how much flexibility they have. And the reason they have that flexibility is because they actually feel in control, and because they know they have that option to do something that's not healthy. It actually keeps them on track and more healthy more often. The same reason that if you can eat takeout, if you can have dessert, you might not even fall back on those habits, but just the security, the comfort of knowing that that is there without it being this landmine, that instills confidence. And that's a great place for people to be.
Absolutely. You got the foreword by Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Got Arnold, man. Habits.
I mean, it doesn't get cooler than that.
I love Arnold. I can't lie. It is pretty cool. And, I think Arnold my favorite part of the forward is that, personalization is the key to diets. He says that diets today are too negative. Everything is about making people feel bad about themselves, but no one has ever made a huge change by feeling terrible about themselves. They need to feel good.
Yeah.
And then you need to figure out what makes you feel good. And Arnold, towards the end of it, he says, he wanted to be the world's greatest bodybuilder who ate Kaiserschmarrn and cherry pie. Kaiserschmarrn is the dessert that his mom would make him growing up.
Wow.
And for a lot of people, you're like, wait a second, that guy, Prime Arnold? Yeah, 2 weeks before his show, he used to go with his buddy, Franco Colombo, and they would go to the House of Pies. I believe it was on Wilshire. It is no longer there. And they'd each eat a whole pie.
Damn.
Because that's what allowed them psychologically to feel sated, to feel satisfied, and to be like, all this sacrifice, all this training is okay, and it's not going to ruin my progress.
I love it.
And everyone has to find kind of what their Kaiserschmarrn cherry pie is. And then build healthy habits around it, and then make your life what you want it to be, because that's what health should be. Health should be fundamentally enjoyable. This stuff should be fun. It shouldn't make you miserable.
100%. I love it, man. Well, thank you so much for writing this book and for coming in. This was a blast. Yeah. Where are you based?
I'm in Denver.
Denver. I think I've been there. No, I've been to Boulder. I haven't been to Denver.
Boulder is, if I had my choice, I'd live in Boulder. My wife chose Denver. It's not a bad second place.
Well, people should definitely pick this up. You can't screw this up. The cover's beautiful. Forward by Arnie. And again, I flipped through it, and there's a lot of fantastic information in here. You've got cool charts and graphs, and you're a wonderful writer. Because this is your second book, but you've written many other books.
This is number 9.
Damn.
Overall.
That's impressive.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, keep it up. Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.